Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today we're going to be getting away from soft plastics and we're going to build a hard plastic lure. In fact, we're going to copy one. This is something I just got a few days ago. It's a Japanese lure and I bought this on the suggestion of one of you guys. One of my subscribers asked me to actually copy this Japanese lure. This is not out of production or anything. It's actually still being made, but it's a little difficult to get. They don't import it very much, and they're not cheap lures. This was sent to me by Yum Fishing. I think that's how you pronounce that. Here's a little QR code in case you guys want to check it out. I have no idea what the writing on the bottom says. I have not opened this package. Let's open it up and see what it looks like, and I'll tell you a little more about this lure. And there it is. This is not a purely wake bait kind of lure. It's sort of a sub-wake crankbait. So you can go slowly and it'll stay close to the surface, making it look like a mullet that's trying to get away. And if you retrieve it slow enough, it'll get close to the surface and give you a nice wake on the surface that will attract fish. This makes it almost ideal for shallow water fishing, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. This action can attract fish up out of the grass or in the rocks. But if you crank it just a little harder, it will go down. It'll dive around 10 to 14 inches below the surface. I can't believe I never came across this lure. I think I'm going to enjoy fishing with it. All right, so that's not an exact replica, but I'm trying to capture the fact that it tapers down at the tail, and then there's a little bit of a belly here starting about a quarter of the way from the tail. But this drawing really isn't going to make any difference in how we copy this. If we were doing this on a 3D printer or something, we might 3D scan it or take just a boatload of measurements all up and down the body. But we're not. We're going to copy this by making a silicone mold of it. But before we do that, we need to find out a few things about this lure. 1, what's it weigh? 2, what's the volume of this lure? And 3, where's the center of gravity? All right, let's get the weight of the body. 12.85 grams. Okay, let's get the weight of the hooks and the split rings. 2.82. And for the next step, we need to suspend it in water, get the weight of the displaced water. So I'm going to fill this kind of a deep and narrow container, and I'll put it on a slightly larger scale and turn it on with the water on there so it's now showing 0. And now I'm going to submerge it, and the idea is to get it all the way in the water without getting the holders in the water and without touching the bottom or sides of the container. So it's 15.00. And because that's the weight of the displaced water and the volume of the lure is the same as the volume of the displaced water, and since water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter, the volume of the lure is 15.00 cubic centimeters or milliliters. To find the center of gravity, we need to hang the lure in front of a plumb line. So we create a plumb line with a level line and a square. But before we check for the center of gravity, let's see what it looks like floating in the water so we get an idea of what it should look like when it's hanging. All right, so that to me looks like it's pretty much horizontal, almost perfectly level, maybe just a degree or 2 tail down. That's what we're going to look for when we search for that center of gravity. So while we have the water tank out, let's go ahead and just put the hooks on this thing. I'm just going to hang them, not fully installed, and put it in here and see how it actually sits. And you can see it's very tail down. So that means I don't have to worry too much about missing the center of gravity forward. The more forward, the flatter this thing is going to be. Notice it floats right now, but if I put the hooks that I actually want to use, which are much stronger than these are only 1x strong, while these are 4x strong. So they're much thinner wire. They're both number 4s, but you'll notice that it makes a big difference with the lure. Now it sinks very slowly and probably would float in salt water, but we don't want it to sink. And I'll show you how we're going to correct for that. This is my technique for finding the center of gravity. First, I put a little fin of tape on the top of the lure, right in the center line. And then I'll poke a bunch of little holes about 1/16 of an inch apart and do a few of them and make sure that they're going to be right around where I think the center of gravity might be. And we'll use that to hang it on the board. The idea is we'll keep trying different hanging points until this thing sits pretty much level, maybe a little tail down. And I'm going to be using one of my little magnetic lure hangers because this is a magnetic board. And I'm going to take a guess at where I think it's going to be. Since it's pretty tail down, I'm going to move it a little farther back. And then we'll just sit it right in the center of that cross. And it's still not far back enough. I'm going to move it back a couple of holes. All right, I think that looks perfect. It's slightly tail down, just like it was in the water. So the idea now is to mark the lure right where this blue line crosses the body. So that is the center of gravity. So to be able to put weights in this thing, we're going to have to suspend them in the mold somehow. And so what I usually do is put them on the wiring harness. And that's what this black line is. It'll come in down to the belly hook and then back to the tail hook. So that we can either attach a single weight right at the center of gravity or put multiple weights that are equidistant from the center of gravity and are equal to each other. This way we keep our same center of gravity. But we're going to make it a little more difficult to do because we're going to have a chamber in here with a ball. And there'll be a magnet, a little tiny magnet right up front that'll hold the weight right there. So what we'll do is we'll figure out the weight of this ball and where it ends up on the magnet. And we'll put a similar weight, the same distance from the center of gravity back here, which will lie probably somewhere around here. And hopefully we can make that balance out. And it's time to make the mold. I start off with a mold box made from Legos. And then I fill it with some good clay. This is sulfur-free clay. And I like to overfill the box so I can then just fillet away the excess. This leaves me with a nice smooth surface. Now I can just place my lure where I want it, make sure it's nicely centered and marked out, and I know exactly where I need to dig out the material. The idea is to dig out enough so that you can bury the lure halfway down into the clay. Once you got it embedded, it's just a matter of smoothing off the edges all around the edge of the lure so that you have a nice seam line when you cast the new one. Now we just need to put some alignment keys in so the two halves of the mold go together nice and straight when we're ready to cast. And I like to form a pouring sprue out of clay. It makes it easier. This way I don't have to cut one in later. Now we need to form some vents. And I like to use some solder. It's flexible and easy to cut and not too expensive. And you want to put them in high spots, places that are too thin to vent themselves. This way you avoid bubbles getting caught in these delicate spots like the point on this nose and the high spots on the lure body. Alright, one of the problems I have with using a clay bed, and this is sulfur-free clay, so it's the good stuff, a little bit expensive, and it's supposed to play nice with platinum silicone, but lately it leaves the silicone tacky. Whatever surface was touching the clay ends up being tacky for at least a half a day. So I'm trying an experiment on this one. I haven't put it on the clay there, but I was trying this coating on the clay. This is water soluble and it can be washed off later so it doesn't ruin the clay, but it should create a barrier between the clay and the silicone. And if this works, I'll let you know what it is in another video. The last step before we pour the silicone is to build up the walls of the box. Make sure we got a good 1/4 inch. Alright, I'm sorry about the background noise, the air conditioning running because it's bloody hot. So the next step is to let this thing dry, and I'm hoping you can see the sheen on the clay. That's the stuff I just put on there. And like I said, if it's going to work, I'll let you guys know what it is and where you can get it. But for now, what I want to do is set up a nice level platform for my mold box. And the way I like to do it is I'll take 4 clay balls, more or less the same size, and put it on the corner of my board, set it down on my table, because this definitely is not level. And then I just shove down on the side that's low. Looks good. Get this side, and then just keep going around till I'm happy with the level. We're ready to go. Now I can just set my mold box on top, and I can lift it up and move it if I need to. Alright, so the silicone I'm going to use is this Smooth Sil. It's from Smooth On, of course, and I actually got it from Total Boats. And if you don't know who Total Boats is, they're a premier supplier. So of course it's a great source for the silicone. They also have it in tin cure. But they have other stuff that we use. Here's a pressure pot, glass micro balloons, if you were wondering where you could get it. Hard to find epoxy pigments, UV lights, alcohol inks. Anything you're going to do that has to do with boats or construction of just about anything, they pretty much have it. And since I bought this goop, which it might give you a hint of what it is, from Total Boats, I also got this from them. So they were good enough to gift me this. This is platinum silicone, so it is the kind of silicone that tends to get tacky on top of that clay bed right there. So next step is to calculate how much of this stuff I'm going to need, mix it up, and pour it. And the way I do my calculations is that I'll just measure the length, the width, and I'll use the little plunger to get the depth. And I do it all in millimeters so that I have easy numbers to work with. Now, since I have the volume of the lure, I can subtract half of that from my volume. And I typically will do that, but not on this side since it has the little divots. I just assume it's going to be pretty close to equivalent to the lure. And if I get a little extra, it won't be much. My volume is right at 104 milliliters, and I'm going to mix by weight, but I will eyeball the volume on the side of the cup, and I'm going to go just a little above 50. All right, that'll do it, and my weight is 73.2, so I can just match that and not worry about volume. I'll tare it, so I'm going nice and slow so I don't go over. All right, that's got it, and it's just a matter of mixing it up. This stuff is pretty thick and viscous. And here's a little pro tip. It's a good idea to use a clear cup because you can see what hasn't been stirred in all the way down to the bottom. Because if you look in the top, it looks pretty good. But obviously, I haven't gotten it completely mixed in. All right, I've got it pretty much stirred in really well. Been scraping the sides, so we're about ready. Now at this point, if you've got a vacuum chamber, you can degas this in a vacuum chamber. Personally, I don't think it's a big deal not to. I like to just let it sit for maybe 5 minutes. I've got 25-minute pot life in this thing. So about 5 minutes will get most of the big bubbles out. You can do something to avoid the bubbles where they really matter, and that's on the skin of the lure itself. So I like to just drizzle. You can use the silicone directly on the lure, and you can use a little brush to smooth it on. The thin layer will degas really well and leave you a thin bubble-free layer right up against your lure. So while I set my cup here for another 5 minutes to degas, that surface will lose all its little bubbles and I can pour the rest on. All right, not much waste. Now, if I want to, I can zero out the same kind of cup and weigh what's left. And I've got about 30 grams. So that's a little bit of waste. I could have reduced 15 grams from each part A and B. This is going to take at least 6 hours to really set up. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Come on, let's get some squirrels. Come on, let's get some squirrels. All right, new day. Let's see what we got here. Oh, that's rock hard. All right, but we do have an experiment going on in here, and we're gonna have to pull the clay off and see if that goop worked and we don't have a sticky layer of uncured silicone in here. I think the clay is a little too soft because of the heat in here, so I'm gonna stick this thing in the fridge, actually in the freezer, and clay down. Let's see if we can't rush this. After about 20 minutes in the freezer, the clay is much less sticky and tends to come out in one piece. Well, almost in one piece. All right, it's looking good. And you might have guessed, our little test went great. There's no tackiness, everything's set perfect. So I'm gonna put the little vent formers back in place, make sure they stay in there. I've got the lure body cleaned up and all that clay off. Of course, our little test isn't really very scientific because we didn't have any controls. I didn't do one without it. So we're gonna do a video testing it out again with a couple of different silicones so we get a little more valuable information. So I get a lot of questions about how to select silicone for lure making. And if you want to see a masterclass on selecting silicone and making silicone mold, let me know in the description. I haven't made one, and I think it's probably due. I get a lot of questions about it. Before we pour the second half of the mold, we've got to make sure the two halves don't get stuck together because silicone will stick to silicone. So I've got to coat this with some Vaseline jelly. You can do this with a demolding spray, but I prefer to do it this way. This way nothing gets on the lure itself, only on the silicone. All right, we're ready to pour the second half of the mold. And since we've got the alignment key sticking up on this side, and we know we poured a little too much last time, I'm gonna pour 20 grams less than the last time. Last time it was 72, so I'm gonna pour like 50 grams of part A and part B. All right, that's pretty close. 50.44, that's pretty good. All right, 50.30, pretty doggone good. Now I'll stir it up and we'll pour it in. All right, let's drizzle some on. And I'm not sure the camera's picking it up. There's little bubbles coming to the surface. I'm gonna give it a little time for all those bubbles to come to the surface. So this way I know there's nothing up against the lure body. All right, we got the measurement perfect this time. That's really satisfying to me. And we'll get back to this in 5 hours. My plan is to cast our first one with no hardware in it so that we can get a weight on it and then we can adjust from there. All right, finally some rain. Whew, thank God, we really need it. This is fully set. Pretty happy with that. It's only been like 4.5 hours. So let's pull the box apart. All right. Let's see that sprue right there. Moment of truth. Oh, yes. 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 All right. Look how nice that is. All right. Beautiful. So you got to admit that is a nice looking mold. And it's a lot easier to get a really nice mold if you start off with a perfectly finished lure master. So let's go ahead and just cast our first test lure without any hardware in it. All right, I'm going to use my normal fast setting resin and some micro balloons in my 10% mix. So we're going to do 7 grams of part A, and then we'll mix in 1.4 grams of micro balloons. All right, that's got it exact. We'll blend that in. I'll zero it again, and we'll put in our 7 grams of part B. All right, and we just blend that in. We don't have a whole lot of time, Though I've been keeping this in the refrigerator because it's so warm. I want to give myself a little extra time for mixing up. Otherwise, I really only have about a minute and a half before this thing starts kicking off, and I'll be able to feel it in the cup. All right, that should be it. All right, that should have it. Hopefully we'll get a good casting. All right, we got a bunch of expansion on this one, and that's because it's so warm in here. So I'm guessing it's gonna be on the light side. And since I've been doing this a long time and I've done a lot of experimentation, I know the density of my warm weather 10% mix, and it should be around 0.58 grams per cubic centimeter. And we know the volume of the lure is 15 milliliters. So I can just multiply those two together. 15 times 0.58, and I get 8.7 grams. That's what the weight of this test lure should be. All right, the stuff in the bottom of the cup is hard. We should be ready to open this thing up. All right, it's looking pretty good. Got a little bit, tiny bit of flash, looking nice. And it's real easy to take off these little vents. Let me go ahead and cut off this sprue mushroom. Look how accurately it actually casts the little eye, and that's nothing. Let me clean it a little bit and then we'll weigh it. All right, let's go ahead and get a weight on this thing. Now, I honestly don't know what this weighs. We just did a quick calculation. Let's see if that holds. That's crazy. 8.69. That is about as close as I've ever come on something like that. But that shows you the power of actually having the information, the data on the original. So now with that piece of information, we know that the weight of the body is 8.7. Our maximum target weight is 15. If we subtract, we get 6.3 grams. That's what we have for our hardware and our hooks, and that should be plenty. All right, we're gonna make our little weight shift chamber out of this piece of straw, and we're gonna put 2 stainless steel balls in it. Cap it with a little piece of resin cap that I make, and I'll hit it with UV light to get it nice and set. Now I'm gonna put a magnet right on the end that also has a little bit of UV resin under it, but I don't have to worry too much because the balls are holding it on and vice versa. Now it's time to make the wiring harness. And once we got it all bent and properly sized, we can set it in place and then glue on our little weight shift tube and the added weight that we need to get it balanced. All right, with these things made, we can weigh them with the body, and we're at 12. We need 2 more grams, and I think we'll be fine. Remember, we just want it slightly lower than 15 grams. And 14.4, I think that'll work perfect. And we'll put that same distance away from the center of gravity as the main weight in this is. All right, there's our assembly all glued in place. All we got to do, drop the other half of the mold on, put it in the lure holder, and we're ready to cast the next one. All right, it's set up. Let's see what it looks like. Nice, pretty much perfect. Let's pull it out. All right, looking really good. No rattle, but haha, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let me clean it up a little bit. All right, I've cleaned it up a little bit, and I want you to look at how perfect the little wire eyes are. The belly hook eye and the tail hook eye, they're just absolutely perfect. And look at the seam line. It's just super nice. No big ridge or anything. No sanding. The only thing I'm gonna have to give it a light sanding right here where the sprue was, but otherwise, it's really perfect. Look at the details. They're absolutely identical to the original. And of course, we've got our weight shift in the inside. That'll give us a really nice long cast. So this is gonna have to be a 2-part build. We've got all the technical stuff done. The next part is gonna be making a few more, painting them, and taking them to the water. And I might even make one in the rotocaster, a nice hollow one with a bunch of BBs in it. So if you guys got curious about making those weight shift little tubes, I did a whole video on them. And I'm gonna put a link up here somewhere just click on there. That's definitely the next thing you should watch. All right, guys, thanks for watching all the way through. Let me know what you think in the description about the original action on this kind of unique little lure. I'm looking forward to fishing with it. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next video.